start at 5:30 p.m. Welcome to everyone here tonight in the gallery. We, the Greater Shepparton City Council, begin today's meeting by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, which now comprises Greater Shepparton. We pay respect to their tribal elders, we celebrate their continuing culture, and we acknowledge the memory of their ancestors. Item number 2, the privacy notice. This public meeting is being streamed live via our Facebook page and made available for public access on our website, along with official minutes of this meeting. All care is taken to maintain your privacy. However, as a visitor in the public gallery, it is assumed that your consent is given in the event that your image is broadcast to the public. It is also assumed that your consent is given to the use and disclosure of any information that you share at the meeting, including personal or sensitive information, to any person who accesses those recordings or minutes. Item number 3, I note there's no apologies this evening. Item number 4, do we have any conflict of interest councillors tonight? Oh, nope. Item number 5, confirmation of minutes of previous meetings. Is there any item of the minutes opposed from the previous meeting? No. Recommendation of item 5 on page 1. Would a council like to move the motion, please?
I'll move that, Madam Mayor, that we accept the...
Adam?
I'll second, Madam Mayor.
Seconder. Thank you, Councillor Hazelman. All in favour? Against? Motion carried.
I didn't wish to speak to the motion anyway, Madam Mayor.
No public.
Or did you?
No. Sorry. Do you want any closing comments?
6, no public questions tonight?
No.
Mr Harriet? Councillors, we go to item 7.1 on page 2, which is contract 1789, heavy plant and equipment hire, wet and dry hire services. On page 2 is the recommendation. Would a council like to move the motion? Councillor Abdullah, do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Giovanetti. Councillor Abdullah, would you like to speak to the
I would
motion?
like to move the recommendation on page 2 as a motion. The recommendation is to endorse the recommendation of tender evaluation panel to include 15 tenderers on the panel of suppliers for plant and equipment hire for infrastructure work, which includes road and drainage construction, road and drainage maintenance, the supply of specialised plant or equipment not readily available to council. Key points of this recommendation are, number 1, the value of the contract 1789 over the 3-year period is estimated at 4.5 million. However, with an optional 1-year extension, this value is estimated to be $6 million. Also, based on the annual usage patterns, it is not cost effective to purchase and manage these equipment and plant. So hiring provides the most cost effective alternative. I also note that due to the past experience of operational difficulties in not having the right equipment available at the right time, it has been recommended that a large panel of suppliers be available to improve the chances of equipment availability when needed. I would like you to note that the local and outside tenderers submitted their response, and the report also shows 9 tenderers who were rejected based on various reasons. These reasons are documented in the report. And the tender evaluation panel has determined that the contractors who are successful in being placed on this suppliers list will be selected for works based on plant availability, plant hire rates, and establishment rates. In view of the information available in this report, I am satisfied with the proposed arrangement and would support this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Abdullah. Councillor Giovanetti, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just briefly, I think it's great to see so many local contractors that have been included in this tender project. It's interesting when you go through and look at the items that we're actually going to be leasing from the local contractors, the water truck rollers, Kanga loaders, and I actually noted a boat and trailer, 12 to 15 foot. I thought that maybe that was for Councillor Patterson to go fishing, but I've been reliably informed that it's for use when floods occur on the river and that we clear material away from bridges, etc.
Thank you, Councillor Giovanetti. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion?
Yes, I was very disappointed my contract wasn't accepted.
Would any councillor like to speak for the motion? Any closing comments, Councillor Abdullah?
No, that's...
We'll now go to the vote. Those in favour? Against? Motion carried. Councillors, we now go to item 8.1 The recommendation is also on page 8, 8.1, section 86, special committees, committees of management memberships. Would the council like to move the motion?
Madam Mayor, I'll move the recommendation printed on page 8 of the agenda.
Thank you, Councillor Hazeman. Do I have a seconder,
I'll
please?
second it, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Hazeman, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, these come up on a regular basis, and we usually make some comments about the contribution that volunteers make in our community, and it does tend to be a little bit repetitive at times, but I think by the fact that so many come up, we tend to gloss over the actual contribution that these people make, and I'm particularly looking through the names associated with the Bunbartha Recreation Reserve, and these are people well known throughout that community. They've made contributions over the many years of service to their local community, and I think it's fantastic that people do put their hand up to manage facilities on behalf of the council, and it's appropriate that they be recognised. And I know that on occasion that through the volunteer awards, people involved in these committees of management do get recognised. I think that it's appropriate that we look at ways and means of acknowledging the service that people do make to our community.
Thank you, Councillor Hazelman. Councillor Patterson, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, especially now after Councillor Hazelman said that. I think that's a terrific idea, and I think we should look at getting some form of recognition, whether it's 20-year certificates of appreciation or something down those lines to actually reward those people. I know from the Bunbartha Recreation Reserve, their tennis club's having a 100-year anniversary this year, and I'm hoping Council can help them out in some way. They're trying to write a book and gather all that knowledge and history sort of thing. But there is a lot of people in this community that do a lot of voluntary work that do need and deserve to be recognised. So I think it's something we should look at as far as trying to identify how we do that without making a mountain of work for our staff.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Any closing comments, Councillor Hazelman?
Yes, it's following on from Councillor Patterson. Look, if I can use the Talagurupna Recreation Reserve as an example, when I first became involved with that reserve, the secretary of the committee, one Alan Hosey, had been the secretary for 37 years and quietly retired from that position, and there's no formal acknowledgement other than a little notification in the pavilion out there to recognise that level of service. And I think it's appropriate, and whether it's a year's service, that would be one way of measuring it, but I think we should look at how we can acknowledge people who do contribute significantly over the years.
Thank you, Councillor Hazelman, and I agree with you as well, Councillor Patterson, on that note. We'll now go to the vote. Those in favour? Against? Motion carried. Councillors, will now go to item 8.2, Community Safety Strategy 2018 to 2021. The recommendation is also on page 13. Would a councillor like to move a motion? Councillor Ozari, what motion would you like to move?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to move the motion, the recommendation as a motion on page 13, that the Council adopt the Greater Shepparton City Council Community Safety Strategy 2018 to 2021. Thank
you, Councillor Orovari. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Abdullah. Councillor Orovari, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Council, with support of the Greater Shepparton Safe Communities Advisory Committee, have developed a new strategy. The strategy goes for 2018 to 2021. This is the third instalment of the strategy, which was first developed in 2007. The strategy speaks for itself. The question quite rightly can be asked, has this strategy been a success? It's not always easy to measure success, but in terms of outcomes, as detailed in the body of the report, and in my time as a councillor and ongoing chair of that committee, I believe the answer is yes. I've always maintained that whilst this is a council strategy, the content of the strategy comes from input provided by our community members. However, it's not to say that government, semi-government authorities and interested groups also have a part to play in shaping the strategy. The strategy is only as effective as the input from its community members, and it's something that needs ownership from that community to truly get the most from it. The strategy speaks extensively about the 5 priority areas of the aspects. However, for mine, the dominant recurring contemporary themes are family violence, drugs and alcohol, and public safety. Public safety in the sense that we as members of the community should be feeling comfortable moving about our community at any time. Sadly, that is not the case. It's a society-wide problem, and Shepparton is no different to that. The question is, how do we manage the expectations of the community in comparison to the strategy? The answer to that is high-level engagement and always try to improve on our aims. There have been many positives over the years flowing from the strategy, and these are contained within the body of the report. Finally, I'd like to wholeheartedly endorse the strategy, thank the community for its support and interest, and would like to note the efforts of Joel Board of Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Orasbari. Councillor Abdullah, would you like to speak to the motion?
So this Community Safety Strategy 2018-2021, its focus is on improving community safety within Greater Shepparton. Current data and statistics have also been used to identify priority areas, and as Councillor Orasbari has mentioned about the outline areas. The vision statement of the strategy says a safe, inclusive and proactive Greater Shepparton. Now it indicates that this is an important strategy, and it has resulted in putting in place enhanced safety measures and support within Greater Shepparton. And some of these measures in past have included safety camera network, lighting upgrades in Mott Street, Stewart Street, crime prevention through environmental design training to council staff, and also domestic violence awareness in projects in partnership with GV Family Violence Prevention Network and Women's Health Network, Northeast. This, as I understand, the draft strategy was exhibited for community consultation that resulted in some important feedback, which was incorporated into the final strategy. The two main outcomes were expansion of measures to include primary school programs and inclusion of GV Health as responsible stakeholder. The feedback also highlighted the need to include youth and children in the strategy as responsible stakeholders. One of the interesting aspects of the strategy, as I was reading through these pages, was that it was guided by the Community Safety Survey 2017 that was done in Greater Shepparton, and some interesting results have been highlighted and indicated within the strategy, and those results have sort of informed this strategy. So one of them, of course, from the survey results, the top three priority areas for community safety in Greater Shepparton were highlighted. And these included, as Councillor Orasbari has highlighted, drug use, public violence and aggressive behaviour, and domestic family violence. The 5 priority goals were outlined, and each of these goals have got strategies and measurements in place, and also the responsibility and timeline to measure those actions. One of the interesting aspects that I noted was that in the priority area 4, alcohol and drugs, there were some statistics given in the strategy which highlighted that in Greater Shepparton, just under a third of residents believe that it is okay to get drunk every now and then. And also one of the statistics highlight that there's only 1 liquor license for every 304 residents in Greater Shepparton. I think one of the aspects of this whole information was that do we really know the concentration of liquor shops in areas?
Do you request an extension?
Yes, please.
Favour of an extension?
Thank you. Just last point, which was something that my thoughts around liquor shops, that after reading this strategy, it got me thinking that, yes, it is shown that there's only 1 liquor license for every 304 residents in Greater Shepparton, but perhaps we should also be looking at some point, the concentration of liquor shops in areas with low socioeconomic demographics, such as North Shepparton, where we have 3 current liquor shops and 1 future, and that is alarming according to many residents. Anyway, in conclusion, I would just say that it's a very important piece of work that was done by the staff in consultation with community and various stakeholder organizations, and I fully endorse this strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Abdullah. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Any?
Yes, I'd just like to make one comment, please. And council's often accused of not acting when they say we should be doing something and not following through. Drugs and alcohol is a terrible scourge in our community, and leading the example as the councillors, and we no longer have alcohol in the councillor suite, so that we're setting the example for everyone. We're really happy with that we can lead the community. So hopefully in some way that will make some small difference. I can't possibly see how, but it might make some small difference.
Thank you very much for those comments. Councillor Patterson. Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Any closing comments? Councillor Ozavari?
I think I'll quit while I'm here.
Good decision.
Okay, we'll now go to the vote. Those in favour? Against? Motion carried. Councillors, will now go to item 9.1 on page 17, contracts awarded under delegation and status of contracts advertised and yet to be awarded December 2017, January 2018 and February 2018.
I'm happy to move that, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Giovanetti. Do I have a seconder, please?
I'll second that, Madam Mayor.
Would you like to speak to the motion, Councillor Giovanetti?
In moving the recommendation on page 17, I think it's great to see that some of the contracts have been awarded, particularly the track lighting for the BMX track. I think one of the big things is the solar installation on council buildings. We are aware that our electricity costs are going to go up considerably over the next 12 months. I think it's great to see that council's taking a proactive approach to ensuring that we can reduce our energy consumption costs as much as we possibly can. I think it's this hopefully is only stage one in a number of stages of solar panels on council buildings.
Thank you, Councillor Giovanetti. Councillor Adam, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thanks, Madam Mayor. Councillor Giovanetti stole my thunder there. That was the main item I wish to refer to, which is the solar. Look, there's many fantastic projects there. They're many and varied. It shows how council is across most community concerns, not just community concerns, but community projects as well, infrastructure projects. But the solar installation on council buildings is something that was a personal, aspiration of mine when I first come onto council. I'm glad to see that it's finally taking place. It not only reduces our energy costs dramatically, but also our carbon footprint, and that fits in well with our whole policy in respect to the environment. So I'm very pleased to see that moving forward.
Thank you, Councillor Adam. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Councillor Summer?
On a point of format, I like the way it's set out this month. It's really clear. We can actually see that the Chief Executive Officer has awarded certain contracts and that directors have awarded certain contracts, and it stipulates which contracts are not yet awarded. So I think it's getting more and more clear every time we do this, and it's a great exercise in transparency.
Thank you, Councillor Summer. Would any councillor like to speak to the motion?
Yes, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hazelman.
Look, this is a regular feature of the monthly meeting, and I think it provides really good information to the community and also to councillors on the progress of works. What it also tells me, though, is in the third quarter of the financial year, we're seriously having a crack at our capital works program, and indicating that the commitment is there. And obviously, last year we met 92% of the capital budget, and clearly we've set a target again to exceed that 90%. We'll get as close as possible to it. The CEO might have a more ambitious target in mind, but 90% is what we've got in mind. And I think by this regular reporting in this format, it keeps councillors and the community aware of what the progress is being made.
Thank you, Councillor Hazelman. Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Any closing comments? Councillor Giovanetti?
No, Madam Mayor.
We'll now go to the vote. Those in favour? Against? Those in favour? Councillor Summer? Oh, sorry, I didn't see it. Yep. Against? Motion carried. Councillors, will now go to item 9.2, Instrument of Delegation, Members of Staff and Development Hearing, on page 22. The recommendations are on page 22 and 23. Would a councillor like to move a motion?
I'll move the recommendation, Madam Mayor, as printed on page 22 and 23 of the agenda.
Thank you, Councillor Hazelman. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Ozavari. Would you like to speak to the motion, Councillor Hazelman?
Very briefly, Madam Mayor, because this is almost purely an administrative matter. We last addressed this delegation back in October of 2017. It has been reviewed and updated to reflect the changes in legislation, some position titles and reporting lines, and and just bringing it up to date to ensure that people who are involved in the development hearing panel are operating within the appropriate delegation.
Thank you, Councillor Hazelman. Would anyone like to speak against the motion? Councillor Ozavari, would you like to speak to the motion?
No, thanks.
Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? To the motion? Councillor Summer?
There's a lot of these allegations. They come back to us quite regularly, usually 6 months after a general election. This one in particular is for the members of staff and the development hearing panel, as was said. And you can see with the policy in its entirety that it is an incredibly long document that makes people accountable for their processes and decisions. Not all of these actually are decided by staff. Some of these they do come back to council for a decision, and it's up to us to just maintain that we keep all of our policies in line in terms of technicalities, and that we are always compliant with all policies at the same time.
Thank you, Councillor Summer. Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Any closing comments? Councillor Hazelman?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, the development hearing panel convenes on a semi-regular basis as needs required. I've indicated in the past that if other councillors wish to attend and view how the panel works, I think that would be a good process. It's very interesting. On occasion, there is the opportunity to almost mediate an out with the decisions made by the development hearings panel do not take away any of the either applicant or objector's further appeal rights at VCAT, but I think it's a very useful and effective process that under this delegation that we can deal with a number of planning matters that otherwise would go through a lengthy and exhaustive process through council.
Thank you, Councillor Hazelman. We will now go to the vote. Those in favour? Against? Motion carried. Councillors will now go to item 9.3 on page 26, Draft Local Law Number 1, Community Living 2018. Would a councillor like to move a motion? Patterson, what would you like to move?
Yes, I'd like to move the recommendation on page 26 to 27. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Sutton. Councillor Patterson, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, very quickly. These are our local laws, ones that you don't know you've got them until you need them, and it regards a noisy cockatoo next door or some small thing like that. We have to allow for the fact that there is noisy cockatoos around and noisy neighbours, and we have to have a process in place. I know a few of the questions I've had over the years is how many pigeons you're allowed to have, etc. They are all in local law, so it's very important that anyone has any concerns has a look at this. It's going out for a consultation process. People have a look at it and get back to us. The current, they sunset every 3 years, and it's 3rd of July 2018, the current guidelines sunset. So I would encourage all ratepayers to have a read, to have a look, think if they can find an issue that they might have with some of that and get back to council or the officers, and we can see what we can do before it's adopted.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Sutton, would you like to speak to the motion?
Virtually just what Dennis has already said, that council is required to review these local laws under the Act, and this one has had minor changes to address a few issues throughout the municipality. So as it's going out to consultation, we'll get some feedback and then we can process it further.
Thank you, Councillor Sutton. Would anyone like to speak against the motion? To the motion, Councillor Summer.
Just another call to arms to the public, because this doesn't happen very often. It looks like it's every 10 years that we get the opportunity to really sift through and see if we need to make any changes. So head to our website and write down a submission. It doesn't have to be complicated. And if you wanted to be heard in person in support of your submission, we will hold a special meeting. So please get around it and let us know what you're thinking.
Thank you, Councillor Summer. Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Councillor Adam.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to reiterate Councillor Summer's comments. I'd encourage the community to really look at this carefully and closely. There's 20-odd amendments there, key proposed amendments, and some may look rather simple in their changes, but they can have some great effects. So I'd recommend that the community have a good hard look at it, and I'd encourage them to submit their opinions on some of these proposed changes.
Thank you, Councillor Adam. Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Any closing comments, Councillor Patterson?
Just that wild corellas are exempt from our management.
We've noticed. We'll now go to the vote. Those in favour? Against? Motion carried. Councillors, now go to item 9.4 on page 31, Draft Local Law Number 2, Procedures for Council Meetings and Commons Seal 2018. The recommendation are on page 31 and 32. Would the council like to move a motion? Councillor Orovari.
I'd like to move the motion, Madam Mayor, on page 31, parts 1, 2, 3 and 4, and on page 32, parts 5, 6 and 7.
Thank you, Councillor Orovari. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Patterson. Councillor Orovari, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, this is essentially a follow-on, but of a different type in relation to our procedures for council meetings, and it's a draft which is going out for the community to make comment on as they see fit or not. In terms of procedures for council meetings, I'm a firm believer that the KISS principle should apply, keep it simple, and if you look at the bottom of page 32, you'll see a number of amendments. And people that regularly attend at our council meetings have in the past vented their spleen in relation to some of the things which go on at council meetings in terms of the impropriety or otherwise in relation to amendments, so on and so forth. And I think it's important that people avail themselves of the opportunity, as Councillor Patterson has previously remarked in relation to the previous notice of motion, to give some input in relation to how they see best that we, as councillors, should progress local government procedural meetings.
Thank you, Councillor Orovari. Councillor Patterson, would you like to speak to the motion? Speak against the motion.
Got a point of clarification, if I may.
Sure.
Is public consultation on meeting procedures required by law?
Yes, it is.
Yes? We might get some further information for you and some further clarity if you need it later.
Oh, that's okay.
Okay. Would any councillor like...
A long yes. It is quite conclusive.
Was there anything else? Any other comment there, Councillor Summer?
Speak against. If it's required by law, I'll reserve my comment.
You, would a councillor like to speak to the motion?
Yep, speak.
Councillor Summer.
I don't particularly believe that meeting procedures should go out to public consultation, because essentially it's us as councillors who are trying to do our best with good governance, and we should get the feel of what works and what doesn't work for us. I think that the meeting procedures we have in place right now are quite robust and effective, and I wouldn't like to see too many changes there. I noticed there was a reference in this report that says our feedback from councillors was taken into consideration, but there really weren't that many changes. So depending on what the public say and what we come up with, hoping that it's not too dramatic.
Thank you, Councillor Summer. Would any other councillor like to speak to the motion? Any closing comments? Councillor Orovari.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, it's all part of the transparency process together with the legislative requirements, so I don't think it's a biggie. It's just something that we need to go through as a council. The law requires it.
Thank you for that. We'll now go to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Motion carried. Councillors, will now go to item 9.5 on page 35, February 2018 monthly financial report. Would a councillor like to move a motion?
I would like
please?
to move that motion, Madam Mayor, or the recommendation as the motion. Sorry for yelling into the mic there.
Thanks. Councillor Adams.
I was scared myself.
Do we have a seconder, please?
I'll second the motion, Madam Mayor, with the hope that Councillor Adam does as good a job as Councillor Patterson did last month.
Well, stay tuned, Councillor Hazelman.
Would you like to speak to the motion, Councillor
I would. I
Adams?
was about to refer this to the councillor on my left here, but I don't want him to actually put our finance officer here behind me, head of our finance, to shame. So could I hand over to give us the title, please, and give us some detail on the report, please.
Thank you, councillors. Sorry.
Right. We had the second.
The finance report for February is in the attachments to your agenda. The primary indicators on the first page of that report are tracking pretty much where we would expect them to be tracking for this time of year. The important one being the working capital ratio, otherwise known as the liquidity ratio, is tracking fairly well, and you'll see that we're currently holding about $31.5 million worth of cash and investments at the moment. That's returning about a bit over 2%, almost 2.2% on an average basis. Rates debtors are up a little bit at the moment compared to this time last year. That's a matter of timing of when our instalment notices and other reminder notices have gone out, and we expect that to normalise by year end. In terms of the operation, operating expenditure is tracking very well year to date without any major variances to budget. The year to date indicator, operating position, we're projecting a downturn in user fees and charges. We're watching quite closely at this point in time and doing some more investigation on. It's predominantly related to our early childhood centres and a bit of a downturn in utilisation of those and a shift between fee-paying customers and the grants that we get in to offset some of that. Linked in with that is also some waste user fees and charges as well, but that's not the predominant reason behind that turn down. On capital expenditure, capital works is progressing fairly well. As Councillor Hazelman indicated before, the contracts are out, and we've got about 68% of our capital budget committed by way of contracts or orders at this point in time. So we're fairly well on track with our capital expenditure. And that's about it from me.
Well, Councillor Hazelman, would you like to speak to the motion?
Very pleasing to hear that it's at 68%, because it's been a bugbear of mine over the years that we adopt a capital works program and then don't deliver it. And it creates all sorts of angst at budget time. And I think it's very important that that's one of the key performance indicators that we need to meet. It means that our budget is both realistic, achievable and measurable, and that's a standard that we should try and maintain.
Thank you, Councillor Hazelman. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Any closing comments, Councillor Adam?
Just to say that I'm happy to see there is no plan to invest in Bitcoin. So apart from that, yes, that's it. Very
Did you
good.
miss that briefing, did you?
I must have missed the Bitcoin briefing, yeah.
Thank you for that.
It's not in the report, so I'm happy to see that.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Adam. We will now go to the vote. Those in favour? Against? Motion carried. Councillors, will now go to item 9.6, review of Audit and Risk Management Committee Charter on page 37. The recommendation is also on page 37. Would a councillor like to move a motion? Councillor Giovannetti.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to move the recommendation on page 37 as a motion.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder, please?
I'll second the motion, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Adam. Councillor Giovannetti, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, briefly, Madam Mayor. The Audit and Risk Management Committee charter is reviewed annually. There are a number of specific areas that we look at in relation to the Auditing and Assurance Standards Board, as well as any changes to the Local Government Act. Those changes and recommendations have been included in the charter, and I'm sure Mr. Koboldick and his Audit and Risk Management Committee will be on top of all that. The only other thing I'd like to say is that the Council has decided that the fees for that committee will remain the same as it was last year.
Thank you very much, Councillor Giovannetti. Councillor Adam, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, look, only just to add that it really is an important committee in Council. It can sometimes be overlooked because it can be, I won't use the word boring, but it can be perceived as long-winded, but they perform a very important role for this Council. Especially, I've had a bit of experience over the past years. I'm sure you, Madam Mayor, now have as well. And there's some key objectives, and the Charter outlines them. And in my experience, they've kept to that Charter very well. It's hugely important, as I said, and I'd just like to congratulate them on their work.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Adam. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Councillor Patterson?
Yes, as a councillor, it gives you a lot of confidence with the degree of auditing that any decision the council makes and expenditure that it goes through. This is one of the final processes in this council, then it continues on through a state government level. So as a councillor, you tend to have complete confidence in the system. It works, and there's plenty of levels to pick up generally when something's not right. And when I was mayor, went to a few of those meetings, and yeah, very precise, very smart people on there, and they really did know their financial figures, unlike a lot of other people that pretend we do. Well, they do.
Finish that one. Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Any closing comments, Councillor Giovannetti?
Not really, Mayor, just that I can see where Councillor Patterson has got his financial acumen from, obviously from attending these Audit and Risk Management Committee meetings.
Thank you very much. I'm sure they are valuable. We'll now go to the vote. We'll move on to the vote, councillors. All those in favour? Against? Sorry, Councillor Adam, was that in favour? Yep. Sorry. Thank you. Motion carried.
I'll sell my pen.
Councillors, will now go to item 10.1 on page 40. The recommendation is also on page 40, the One Tree Per Child project. Do I have a councillor who'd like to move a motion? Councillor Patterson, what would you like to move?
Yes, as you said, I'd like to move the recommendation on page 40, Madam Mayor.
Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Giovannetti. Councillor Patterson, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, this has kicked off, as we all know, and it's been very successful. It's one of those programs, like so many things you do as a councillor and just generally in life, you have to put a lot of work in before you start getting a reward, and the next few years we'll start getting a reward. If you drive through the Golden Valley, compared to 20 and 30 years ago, the amount of work that's been done planting trees, a variety of birds, shrubs and trees, etc. It just makes the place a different place than it used to be. You see a lot more bird life, a lot more wildlife, and in this case in the city it'll make a big difference to the bird life as well. It'll also make a big difference to the shade that's available. Global warming, it'll be cooling things. So it's all positive, as well as just looking at a street that's nicely treed looks so much better. And we all know about Maud Street. You know, why is Maud Street such a nice street? It's got nice trees. You know, that's the main reason. So hopefully in years to come we'll have lots of Maud Streets, we'll have lots of forests in our cities, and it'll be a lot nicer place to be, even more so than it is now. I can't believe people are laughing at this. I'm so serious about it. It's really a great thing that we're doing, and I'm looking forward to continuing it on.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Patterson.
My tree is growing very well.
Wonderful. Have you finished?
I think so.
Thank you very much. Councillor Giovannetti, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, look, I'd just like to concur with what Councillor Patterson has said. Look, I think it's great that last year we actually exceeded the number of trees that we were going to plant. I think we exceeded that by a few hundred, which was terrific. I think one of the things I've found from this whole process was the involvement of the community groups and the schools that were involved. I think it was great to see the kids, particularly in the primary schools where we attended their planting sessions, how keen they were, and that's going to give them I suppose, a level of responsibility to look after those trees for as long as they're at that particular school, which I think is a good thing, because often trees that we plant aren't looked after, but by going through this process, I believe that there'll be less losses than what we've perhaps had in the past.
Thank you, Councillor Giovannetti. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak to the motion?
Yes, Madam Mayor. I'd just like to
Councillor
reiterate
Adam.
Councillor Giovannetti's comments. I think the whole process of the tree planting is giving the children, from the schools and the community, a sense of ownership and responsibility, as Councillor Giovannetti said, and I think that's a great thing. That's probably what's made this more successful than it otherwise would be. And the fact that they're real trees is another plus as well. They're not plastic.
Thank you, Councillor Adam.
That was directed at a councillor or a person in this room
You?
who would know what that means.
You? Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Any closing comments, Councillor Patterson?
So I've heard of rubber trees, but never plastic trees.
We might want to speak to the CEO about that.
And might I just add, it was over 17,000 trees that were actually planted, so that's sensational. All right, we'll now go to the vote. Those in favour? Against? Motion carried. Councillors, will now go to item 10.2, Roadside Weeds and Pest Program Funding on page 44. The recommendation is also on page 44. Do I have a councillor who'd like to move the motion? Councillor Ozavari.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to move the recommendation as a motion on page 44.
Thank you for that. Do I have a seconder, please?
I'll second the motion, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Adam. Councillor Ozavari, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you for the opportunity. The motion is self-explanatory. Essentially, what's going to happen is the government is going to give us a sum of money for 2 years to perform a control of weeds and other noxious pests that might inhabit the byways and the highways of our community.
Councillor Adam, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, it's not a lot of money, Madam Mayor, but it's an amount that will assist us in attacking and trying to control these noxious weeds, as Councillor Ozavari pointed out. It's almost an opposite motion to the previous one, isn't it? One we're promoting greenery and this one we're not. But no, it needs to be done. We must protect our native species of fauna and, well, flora, sorry, not fauna. And this goes a small way to achieving that.
Thank you, Councillor Adam. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Councillor Patterson?
I'd just like to point out that we have a policy here that we've developed. We have to develop that policy to obtain the $54,000 for weed control. And we're just coming to the end of the season, I know, but Bindi has just got out of control right through Northern Victoria, basically. And hopefully we can concentrate on that. It's a curse of everyone that's got anything that's made of rubber, flat tyres, etc. So, yeah, it's good that we've gone down this course and we can identify what weeds, and council does it already, but we've got some more money to spend on it. And they can identify it and target it in a more precise way.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Any closing comments, Councillor Ozavari?
No, thanks, Madam Mayor.
Go to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Motion carried. Councillors, will now go to item 10.3 on page 49, Greater Shepparton Township's Framework Plan Review 2018, endorsed and released for public comment. The recommendation is on page 50. Do I have a councillor wishing to move the motion? Councillor Giovanetti.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to move the recommendation on page 50 as a motion.
Thank you, Councillor Giovanetti. Do I have a seconder, please? Need a seconder. Councillor Ozavari. Councillor Giovanetti, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Just briefly, this is another one of our documents that's going out for public comment. It's great to see that we're looking at not only Shepparton Township but also some of the smaller municipalities, smaller towns within the municipality for growth in those particular areas. A number of areas have been identified in many of the towns. Some of them are aligned to their community plans, which is fantastic. But it's something I think that ratepayers should have a look at, particularly those in the smaller towns, to see where the development is being proposed for the future. And I think it's an extremely good document.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Giovanetti. Councillor Ozavari, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Just to dovetail into Councillor Giovanetti's comments, if you believe what you read and you see in the media and so on and so forth about the potential explosion of the regional cities in terms of population expansion over the next 20 to 30 years, it becomes apparent that this document's strategic value can't be underestimated, and it's important that people participate and take ownership of it.
Thank you for those comments. Would anyone like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Councillor Patterson.
I'd just like to congratulate Council on developing this policy. People, everyone hears of a tree change, which is people shifting out of Melbourne to places like Shepparton. Well, there's people that believe Shepparton too big. They want to shift out of places like Shepparton into your Telegroup, Zunderas, etc. And what this document does is identifies the strengths and weaknesses in those towns, what's there for housing in the future. And I think it's great that we're looking at that, so these towns will be able to grow. We can see what infrastructure is needed in the future, so we'll help them to grow. They want to be small, but they don't want to be that small. They want to get the place so it can support a good shop and maybe a pub or something like that, so they generally want to increase it. So I think it's something where the council has done really well. I've looked at this and said, if Undera wants to improve its size or increase its size, what we need to do is this, and it's great. I really do congratulate the council officers for taking up the challenge.
Agree. Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Councillor Summer?
I think we're very lucky to have these small towns and a central business district of Shepparton. It offers people the opportunity to experience country living, whereas they still have the option to come into Shepparton for all their services, and that's something you can't really get in Melbourne. It's something that makes us quite unique. It allows us to look at where our resources should be spread, and I do appreciate this plan.
Thank you, Councillor Summer. Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Any closing comments, Councillor Giovannetti?
Just wrapping up, Madam Mayor, I'll reiterate what I said before, that people within the smaller communities within the municipality really do need to have a look at this document to see how it can affect them. As Councillor Orosvari has already mentioned, the possibility of improved train transport between Melbourne and Shepparton really does open up a lot of these smaller towns for people to move to the area, and I think it's great that we're actually highlighting the areas that would be beneficial for future development.
Thank you very much, Councillor Giovannetti. We'll now go to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Motion carried. Councillors will now go to item 10.4 on page 54, adoption of Amendment C196 to the Greater Shepparton Planning Scheme, addendum to the Urban Design Framework, Shepparton North and South Business Areas, July 2017. The recommendation is on page 55. Would the council like to move the recommendation? Move a motion? Councillor Sutton. Do I have a seconder, please? Oh, sorry, Councillor Sutton. It's a long one. Perhaps you just verify which item it is.
Recommendation on page 55. I'll move that as a motion.
Thank you very much. And a seconder, please. Councillor Summer. Councillor Sutton, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, just to say that this provides the design guidance for future developments, and that will assist in the visual amenity of both the north and the south commercial areas, which is a good thing.
Thank you very much. Councillor Summer, would you like to speak to the motion?
Typically, it's beautifying our entrances, which is something that is often fed back to us, that it's something we should be concentrating on. Most of the recommendations here, even after going to the panel, to me they're common sense. I think they should be applied a little bit further than just the Northern Gateway and Koala Lakes Drive. It's going to make a difference moving forward. It'll take a while for it to actually take some shape visually, but because we can't actually put retrospective changes onto those parcels of land. But moving forward, I think it's a very positive thing.
Thank you, Councillor Summer. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Any closing? Oh, sorry, Councillor Hazelman.
Yeah, it's not a bad example of how the planning scheme actually works. That we've got a document that originated back in 2006, regularly reviewed, and as part of that latest review, the council resolved in July last year to adopt an addendum to the Urban Design Framework. Goes out on public exhibition, a number of objectors come in, it goes through a panel process, and ultimately, with some small variations to the original, it's back here for us to adopt it and then refer it to the Minister for Planning for approval. So I think it's not a bad example of how the planning system works effectively.
Agree. Thank you very much, Councillor Hazelman. Would anyone, councillor, like to speak to the motion? Any closing comments, Councillor Sutton? We'll now go to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Motion carried. Councillors will now go to item 10.5 on page 62. It's a rather long recommendation. We have on page 63, 64, 65, 66, 67 and 68 and 69. 63 to 69 might have been easier. Do I have a councillor that would like to move the motion, please? Councillor Giovannetti, do I have a seconder? Patterson? Councillor Giovannetti, would you like to speak to the motion?
Mayor, I'd like to move the recommendation on pages 60.
Read it out, please, Councillor.
Sorry?
Could you read it out, please?
We don't have time, Councillor Patterson. The recommendation on pages 63 to 69, this is in relation to a three-lot subdivision on the corner of Orr and Balaclava Road. It meets all the council's requirements. The The conditions that are placed on this particular development are obviously numerous, as you can tell by the length of the motion itself. But it's a development that will prove beneficial to that area of town.
Thank you, Councillor Giovannetti. Councillor Patterson, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, there's 6 pages of paperwork there regarding the amendments and well, not amendments, but what conditions attached to it. There were 6 objectors. The objectors, loss of community dwellings to be constructed cheaply. All the actual objections wouldn't stand up at VCAT, so if we didn't pass this, it'd go straight to VCAT and get a tick straight away. So, you know, I probably wouldn't want it next door to my place either, but it's a legal development. Good luck to them.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Councillor Ozavari.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The thing that I found quite interesting about this is that it's making it denser in terms of we're going up, and I think this is a sign of the future that a lot of people environmentalists, not with disdain, but the reality is that people these days are pushing for the fact that the urban sprawl is not only restricted, is not only a byproduct of Melbourne, but it's a byproduct of regional cities. And because we're such a car-orientated society, people will get in the car and drive an hour and a half to work and things of that nature. But I think the reality is that the signs of the future dictate, and you only have to read the media, where major cities are trying to curb the amount of vehicle access into central cities and things of that nature. So moving along these lines, I can see the day in Greater Shepparton where we're going to have a greater density of multi-storey. Just an example of it. I also found it interesting in discussion at briefing we were talking about the prescriptive nature of the landscape plan, which I personally don't necessarily support, because man's house is his castle, and I understand that rules and regulations are an important part of the planning aspect, but sometimes I think it can get a little bit over the top. And
thank you, Councillor Ozavari. Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Councillor Summer?
I will speak to the motion. I will say that initially when I heard the location of this, I was a little bit nervous being on Orr Street. Then I found out it was at the far end of Orr Street, so it's not quite as detrimental to the amenity of that street. It's just such a beautiful street. And I do agree that high density housing does have its place, especially with such a bourgeoising city. But that doesn't mean we stop at protecting existing amenity, because once it's gone, it's gone. And I know we have heritage systems in place to try and protect this. But I noticed in the report there it does mention there's no relevant neighbourhood character objective developed for the area. We don't actually have those in Shepparton. So if we were to protect these precincts like Maud, Corio, Orr Street with these beautiful trees, these gorgeous buildings, I think perhaps it's something we should be looking at, and that would give us some protection at VCAT for further development in inappropriate areas.
Thank you, Councillor Summer. Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Any closing comments, Councillor Giovannetti?
No, Madam Mayor.
We'll now go to the vote. All those in favour? Go to item 10.6 on page 102, use and development of a 41.3 metre high telecommunications tower and associated infrastructure in the public park and recreation zone and buildings and words floodway overlay and land subject to inundation overlay. The recommendation on page 103, 104. Do I have a councillor who'd like to move a motion? Councillor Ozavari. You don't have to read it all out, perhaps note it.
Councillor Patterson has suggested to his colleague, Councillor Giovannetti, the recommendation as the motion on page 103 and 104. Yes, look...
I just need a seconder before we move forward.
Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Abdullah. Councillor Abdullah, I think we got him first. You checked it back to it. Would you like to speak to the motion, Councillor Ozavari?
Yes, look, thanks for the opportunity. First, I'd like to acknowledge a lady who came to council and spoke to us as a collective of councillors, and thank you for coming tonight. She said to us as a group that she'd lived in this area for 34 years. And she said she had a two-storey residence and she really loved the view, or the amenity as it's described in planning, that she looked out her window. She said how the bird life and concern for various other issues, electromagnetic things of that nature. And I'm not an expert, and I well understand those concerns, because I wouldn't like a tower like that in my place or near my place. However, planning is a very cold, clinical area of legislation, and unfortunately amenity doesn't really come into it. So technology comes at a price, and that price, or progress, comes at a price, and that's not always something that we want. In the circumstances of this particular telecommunications tower, it's a single tower, 41.3 metres high. You can't miss it. But we've been assured that it complies with everything that's required. We had people in to speak to us from Telstra. Telstra will have the tower and Optus will feed off it. It'll improve the strength of the signal, the speed and connection of Wi-Fi. We were informed that there's a 70-80% data usage increase per year. Infrastructure costs money. There's a rental fee that's attached to it. There will be an aircraft beacon on top. We've done the aeronautical examination from an expert to say that there'll be limited risk in relation to any planes flying off course and striking it. So, in all respects, the recommendation, in my view, has merit, although I do acknowledge that it won't please everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ozavari. Councillor Abdullah, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, I would sort of reiterate what Councillor Oswari has said, and I do acknowledge the concerns raised by our community members, and you made a presentation the other day. However, the reality is that it is a growing region. We do need better telecommunication services in Greater Shepparton, and this tower is a necessary infrastructure to provide better telecommunication coverage and services to our community. I had a look at read the report, and I am satisfied. I would support this recommendation, and some of the main reasons behind my endorsement would be that the concerns raised by Shepparton Aerodrome Committee have been addressed. The civil aviation safety and standards are to be followed as part of the approval conditions. And also during the briefing by Telstra and Optus representatives, they were advising us that the community concern about the health issues resulting from the electromagnetic radiation, that has also been addressed, because we were advised that the electromagnetic radiation from this tower would be under 1% of the allowable level of radiation. So I believe that the health safety concerns have been addressed, and I think we do need this infrastructure, so hence my support for this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Abdullah. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Councillor Sutton?
I don't like the idea of having a telecommunication tower in the middle of a park, and I realise that it probably meets all the planning and policies in it, etc. But I just don't like the idea of it being there. It's a great big tower. It's in the middle of a park. Kids play there. There's two ovals. There's the bowls club, tennis club, and I'm just not happy with it being there, so I can't actually agree to it.
Thank you, Councillor Sutton. Would any councillor like to speak for the motion?
Yes, thanks, Madam Mayor.
Councillor
I just
Adam.
want to make a couple of points. Everything that Councillor Orazvari pointed out is true. We can never always address the concerns of the community members in respect to these types of structures. But I think Telstra and Optus should be congratulated at least. It's a co-location type tower, so if both companies weren't on the same tower, we would probably be sitting here shortly having another discussion about another proposal. So at the very least we can be happy with the fact that we're killing two birds with one stone, effectively.
Thank you, Councillor Adam. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Councillor Patterson?
Yes, first of all, I'd like to congratulate Councillor Osvari on his sensitivity in this matter. It is a very sensitive matter, and I know you come and approach council and had to say, and we appreciate that. We wish more people did and would know where people stand. Fact is, there's never a right place for a tower, unfortunately. I've never seen one that's gone in the right place yet, but they're an essential tool of the world today. And as Councillor Sutton said, you know, a park's not a good place for it, but the kids will be down there using their mobile phones, so they want reception. So we've got to have one somewhere. I endorse what Councillor Adams said, that Optus and Telstra to be congratulated, combining their efforts to have one tower only, and that, as you said, would restrict another tower from going up. And one point I noted when you addressed council was your concern for birds. And as a guy that spends a lot of time watching our feathered friends, I can guarantee you it won't make one up. It'll actually attract more birds. You know, they love somewhere to sit and climb, and most of them will be corrals, and I'll wreck the bloody tower probably, but they will come in numbers. Don't worry about that. There's something else there for them. And your birds of prey have got somewhere high to sit and watch and all that sort of stuff. So it's not all doomed for you, although, as I said, it's not good looking out over your back fence and seeing a tower. Unfortunately, it has to go somewhere. Unfortunately, there's never the right place for it, but we have to pass it. Otherwise, it'll be at VCAT and it'll be done anyway and cost us a lot more. So, sorry for the inconvenience, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Any closing comments, Councillor Osvari?
Oh, thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, all the commentary has been noted by me, and the other thing that I'd like to say in terms of a separate issue but intrinsic in the placement of that tower is that if you've been following the media in the last few days in relation to the fires down in the southwest, one of the biggest bugbears that have come out at the moment is in relation to very poor mobile phone coverage. And one woman actually was on the radio saying how the news that she was receiving was in fact 12 hours old. She couldn't access her mobile phone because there was no signal. This tower is currently rated to 3 to 4, 3G, 4G, and will be 5G in the future. And I think it's an intrinsic part of the network of telecommunications that we need, particularly in rural areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Osvari, and thank you everyone for those comments tonight. We'll now go to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Motion carried. Councillors, will now go to item 10.7 on page 118, the 2018 China Delegation and Asia Fruit Logistica. The recommendation is on page 119. Would a councillor like to move a motion? Councillor Giovanetti.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to move the recommendation on page 119 as a motion.
Thank you very much. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Patterson. Councillor Giovanetti, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. This is another opportunity for Greater Shepparton City Council to make its way into the Asian market. Last year we had Councillor Adam and Mr Harriott and staff attend the pardon me, the Fruit Logistica, I was just trying to think of the right word, in Hong Kong. And that, in many respects, has paved the way for getting some of our stone fruits into the Asian market, particularly China. I think we would be remiss as a municipality if we did not follow up on the opportunities that are there. And also, I think that by also visiting another country whilst you're in the vicinity, I think makes excellent sense. We have a huge horticultural industry in our area, and we as a council, I think, need to do what we can to attempt to expand the production and the sale of fruit into the Asian market. I noticed in the Shepparton News the comment today that it was a junket. I'm sure young Thomas didn't write that. But the fact of the matter is that it's not a junket. If you have a look at the agenda, I'm glad I'm not going, to be perfectly honest, because you run off your feet. So I think it's money well spent, and I think it can only be advantageous to Greater Shepparton City Council in the long run.
Thank you, Councillor Giovanetti. Councillor Patterson, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, I would. Councillor Giovanetti done a good job of summarising, took a lot of my thunder there. It's certainly not a junket. It is hard work. I think I'm more qualified than any other councillor here to endorse this because I'm the only mayor for the last 6 or 7 years that hasn't been on a junket. The thing about it is, and something that really sticks in my mind, well, before I go any further, I'd like to comment about the $365,000 mentioned in our paper this morning, Thomas, too, so that wasn't a real good look. Anyway, the important thing is that I went to a briefing or a lecture with the Trade Minister, the Federal Trade Minister at TAFE, I can't think of his name, 3 or 4 years ago. Andrew Robb, Minister who's I think now retired. He was a Trade Minister and he'd pulled off a couple of magnificent trade deals. And his point was, don't wait till it happens, it won't happen. You've got to be progressive, it's there for you, you've got to get out there and you've got to grab it. If you're going to sit back and wait for all these deals to come to you, it's not going to happen. Now, we are continuing on the work that, the last few years of the mayors getting over there, and it's got to the stage now where staff are going. I totally support that. Mayors will change every couple of years. You need that constant supply and contact with staff, which are part of this delegation. And it's easy for a ratepayer to sit back. I can imagine people sitting around and saying, council wasting $36,000 on a junket. But, hopefully this will get the kid a job, or their grandkid a job. It'll grow the school, the whole town can grow because our rural producers are really blooming because of these new deals they have. So it's important we're on the front foot. All mayors and all councillors the last few years, we're all been proactive trying to get this up and running, and it's important it continues on because, as I said, Andrew Robb said, don't wait till it happens, it won't happen. You've got to go and make it happen, and by doing what we're doing, we're making it happen.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Councillor Summer?
Just on the Shep News article, just to make it really clear. One, it's not a junket. The people who go are exhausted by the time they get back and there's no sightseeing. And two, it wasn't a $300,000 proposal. This is $36,531 and that includes GST for a number of people to go over and represent Greater Shepparton in an area that's going to buy our fruit. So export is the backbone of this region, as we know. We need to actually continue relations with China that we've started earlier in order to really capitalise on that. There's already people growing fruit who are going to these expos, and with the Mayor of Greater Shepparton by their side, they're really going to close some deals there. And I also want to note the contribution that the former Mayor Dinny Adam made to these ventures, because I believe he was the driving force behind a lot of this policy stuff. He's already gone over there before. He's made some very strong networks, and I'd like to, I won't raise it now as a motion, but I think we should have further conversation about whether Councillor Dinny Adam accompanies the delegation over just to give us a little more oomph.
Thank you, Councillor Summer. Would any councillor like to speak to the motion?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I think I should. Well, thank you, Councillor Summer, for that kind appreciation of what's happened, but it's been a group effort, and I'd also like to take the opportunity to explain this word junket. Although we use this humorously here tonight, I can assure you, and I'm sure our CEO, Mr Harriott, can attest to the fact that it's no junket. We nearly lost him over there at one point, and it was touch and go for a while. So, thanks for your assistance. Absolutely, Peter. No, seriously, it's. I think the value of these trips aren't immediately recognised straight away, but last year was a bit of a reconnaissance mission in respect to looking at the fruit logistica. This year we've taken that next step and actually having a stand representing Greater Shepparton, and I think it'll just forge us ahead in respect to our trade opportunities. We met with obviously Australian federal authorities over there, which we probably wouldn't have contact with them here, strangely enough, but over there in that environment, and they were very helpful. I've always supported the international engagement policy, which I'm happy that we have one now. So look, I fully support the mission, and I think it can only get bigger and grow stronger.
Thank you, Councillor Adam. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Any closing comments? Councillor Giovannetti?
Just, Madam Mayor, that I think it's an opportunity too good to miss. I think we would be remiss if we didn't follow up on the groundwork that's been done previously.
Thank you very much, Councillor Giovannetti. We'll now go to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Motion carried. Council will now go to item 10.8. Implementation of Commercial Activity Centre Strategy November 2015 Amendments C192 and C193 Part 1. We have an alternative motion due to an incorrect page numbers listed, which is now up on the screen. Would the Council like to move a motion? So the only difference was the page numbers were incorrect, so we've actually fixed that, yep.
Madam Mayor, I'll move the recommendation that's on the screen as a motion.
Thank you, Councillor Giovannetti. Do I have a seconder, please? Would a Councillor Summer? Councillor Giovannetti, would you like to speak to the motion?
Just that the resolution tonight in regard to the application from Shepparton Proprietary Limited only deals with Council's position in regard to the revised layout of the development and associated conditions, which we are recommending support of. The recommendation now specifically deals with the need for Section 170.
The next one.
Sorry?
That's the next one.
10.9. Not a bad hope.
That's all right.
Pretty good for a little bit.
It was actually.
Well, basically...
Would you like to speak or would you like to have a closing comment? We might come back for a closing comment.
What you're talking about at all?
I thought I had, but I obviously haven't.
Councillor Summer, would you like to speak to the motion?
All right. This is pretty much along the lines of what was being said, but in a different context, obviously. It's got a C193 component and a C192 component. These were challenged after we proposed them last time. They went to a panel, and the panel came back with a number of changes, and hopefully we've all sorted everything out. I mean, this is what panels are for. It keeps us accountable. There were questions around whether the resolution to delegate power to the Chief Executive Officer to adopt amendment at a later date, whether that complied with the Act, and they decided that it did not. So yes, we can, we're not perfect, but we have come back here, and hopefully everything is consistent with exactly what we need to do.
Thank you, Councillor Summer. Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak to the motion?
I'd just like to make a quick comment. I'm looking forward to the release of the movie.
Okay. Councillor Giovannetti?
I
Sorry.
don't think I should say anything further.
Sorry, prior
Madam
to
Mayor.
that. Sorry, Councillor Giovannetti. Prior to that, does any councillor would like to speak to the motion? Any closing comments now, Councillor Giovannetti?
No, nothing further than what I've just said, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Motion carried. Council will now go to item 10.9 on page 136. Actually, we do now have another alternative motion. It's a clearer recommendation that now includes reference to section 173, which is now up on the screen. Would a council like to move a motion?
I've already gone halfway through it. I might as well move this one, Madam Mayor. I've moved the recommendation on the board behind us.
Giovannetti, do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Summer. Councillor Giovannetti, would you now like to speak to that motion?
As I said before. But I might read it out because it did sound reasonably good. The resolution tonight in regard to the application from Shepparton Proprietary Limited only deals with Council's position in regard to the revised layout of the development and associated conditions which we are recommending support of. This resolution is not contradictory to the position that was held at the compulsory conference, and the recommendation now specifically deals with the need for a Section 173 agreement that restricts certain uses of shop floor space and provides for infrastructure and a community centre.
Thank you, Councillor Giovannetti. Councillor Summer, would you like to speak to the motion?
I am pleased that we have resolved, or are resolving, to support the last independent supermarket proprietor in Australia. I think they give a lot back to the community. Give a lot back. It also mentions in the report that there is another proposed supermarket development in that area, which has been a bone of contention for a long time. Personally, I think it's a good problem to have. I think competition is good. Large investments have been coming into Greater Shepparton, as we all know, with solar and with Bunnings, with a whole bunch of things. So they need to be managed, and that's our job. We certainly don't want to draw people away from the CBD by having too many competitive things on the outskirts of town. And I think that once we get to the pointy end of this, we can resolve to compromise with the applicant to make sure that they have an appropriate development in that space.
Thank you, Councillor Summer. Would anyone like to speak against the motion? Would anyone like to speak to the motion?
I think Councillor Sutton blinded by the light.
Oh. Put the blind down, please. Very good.
You can see.
Thank you for that. So, would the council like to speak to the motion? Councillor Hazelman?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Obviously, as the report indicates, this matter is in BCAT. What the report also indicates is that over time the proposals for this particular site have changed. Changed as often as Councillor Patterson changes his underwear, I think. We've seen.
Point of order, I don't wear it.
We've seen a variety of layout plans have been submitted, and they're all documented in the report. And we've also know from the report that our officers have been participating in compulsory conferences at BCAT to try and come up with an acceptable proposal. It doesn't negate any of the other discussions around the planning scheme amendments and whatever. What this does is provide some form, some physical shape and form to any potential development that does occur on this site. It will be supported in this format, subject to another range of issues, particularly the 173 agreement, and that's a matter of negotiation with the applicant at some future point.
Thank you, Councillor Hazelman. Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Any closing comments, Councillor Giovannetti?
No, I think it's all been well covered, Madam Mayor.
We'll now go to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Motion carried. Councillors, we'll now go to item 11, any tabled motions, nil received. Item 12, reports from council delegates to other bodies, nil received. Item 13, reports from special committees and advisory committees, nil received. Item 14, notice of a motion, amendment or recession, nil received. And item 15, documents for signing and sealing, nil received. Go to item 16.1 on page 152, Councillors' Community Interaction and Briefing Program. The recommendation is on page 153. Would a councillor like to move a motion? Councillor Patterson, what would you like to move?
I'd like to move the motion on page, the recommendation, on page 153.
And a seconder, Councillor Adam.
Would you like to?
Thank you, Councillor Adam. Would you like to speak to the motion, Councillor Patterson?
Everyone's been very busy, especially the Mayor.
Councillor Adam, would you like to speak to the motion?
Ditto, Madam Mayor.
I'd like to speak against the motion. Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Councillor Summer.
I can't help but point these out because some of these are really interesting things that we would never get to do if we weren't in a very privileged position of representing the community. It's very diverse. Some of the ones I want to point out is the Aboriginal street art launch, which we've just had photo opportunities at, and it's already gone viral on Facebook, and it really does represent some amazing Aboriginal women who have been part of our community. We've also got the Soft Core exhibition at Sam Art Museum. It's a terrific exhibition, and I do hope, if it's still, is it still going? Point of clarification, is it still on? Because I think it's worth all of us going to have a look at that one. Off-leash dog park committee, that was great. They're very passionate people. So I didn't get to go to a lot of these, but what I did go to, really take a lot away from.
Thank you, Councillor Summer. Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Any closing comments, Councillor Patterson?
No, thank you.
We'll now go to the vote. All in favour? Against? Motion carried. Councillors, will now go to item 18, urgent and other business, not included on the agenda. Sorry, John.
17.1.
Oh, sorry? I missed one. Oh, sorry, my apologies. 17.1, Assembly of Councillors. For some reason I've missed it. Oh, here we go. Sorry, on page 154, and the recommendation is on page 163. My apologies for that. Would the council like to move a motion? Councillor Sutton, what would you like to move?
I'd like to move the recommendation on page 163 as the motion that council note the record of assemblies of councillors.
Thank you, Councillor Sutton. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Ozavari. Councillor Sutton, would you like to speak to the motion? Councillor Ozavari.
No, thank you.
Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Any councillor like to speak to the motion? Any closing comments, Councillor Sutton? We'll now go to the vote. All in favour? Against? Motion carried. Councillors, now go to item 18, urgent and other business not included on the agenda. We have nil. Confidential management report, number 19, we have nil. We have item 19.1, designation of confidentiality of information, report attachments. The recommendation is on page 164. Do I have a councillor who'd like to move a motion? Councillor Summer, what would you like to move?
Recommendation as printed on page 164.
Thank you, Councillor Summer. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Sutton. Councillor Summer, would you like to speak to the recommendation?
Quite simply, it's a matter of commercial confidence, and we wouldn't be very responsible if we allowed sensitive information out.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sutton, would you like to speak? Might have missed something.
Radio station.
Councillor Sutton, would you like to speak to the motion? Would any councillor like to speak against the motion? Would any councillor like to speak to the motion? Any closing comments, Councillor Summer? We'll now go to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Motion carried. So I'd like to note that the next council meeting will be in Marupna on April the 17th at Marupna Hub at 23 Alexandra Street. I now declare this meeting closed.
Thank you very much.